In the hushed, velvet-draped world of Aria, a name was spoken only in whispers, a name that could curdle the most expensive cream and silence the most boisterous laughter: Selina Northwood. She was the wife of the magnate Preston Northwood, a woman sculpted from ice and entitlement. Her presence in the restaurant was less a visit and more a judgment. Staff would tremble, chefs would sweat, and managers would pray. For years, her reign of quiet terror was absolute, her power unassailable. Everyone feared the millionaire's wife. That is until the new waitress, a girl no one even bothered to learn the name of, arrived, and single-handedly revealed the ridiculous fragile truth hiding beneath the diamonds and disdain. Aria was not merely a restaurant, it was a theatre of wealth. Located in a discreet, ivy-covered corner of a city that worshipped money, it was where deals were sealed with a handshake over a $500 a steak, and reputations were made or broken by the tilt of a wine glass. The air itself seemed filtered, smelling of old leather truffle oil and the faint, sweet perfume of generational power. The staff moved with the silent, practiced grace of dancers, their cardinal rule drilled into them from day one. The patron is always right, especially when they are wrong, and no patron was ever more right than Selina Northwood. She wasn't loud or ostentatious. Her brand of cruelty was a far more refined poison. It was in the languid, judgmental sweep of her gaze across a freshly set table, a gaze that could find a microscopic flaw on a fork tine from 10 feet away. It was in the subtle, disappointed sigh she'd release after tasting a wine, a sound that could get a sommelier fired. It was in the way she never ever used a staff member's name, referring to them only with a clipped "you" or a sharp snap of her fingers. Her husband, Preston Northwood, was a titan of industry, a man whose name was etched onto buildings and whose decisions could sway the market. In Aria, however, he was merely an accessory, a handsome, well-tailored prop who sat beside his wife, nodding absently as she systematically dismantled the confidence of whoever was assigned to their table. He seemed either oblivious to his wife's casual malevolence or simply too weary to care. The staff had a name for the corner booth she always demanded: the guillotine. The unlucky waiter assigned to it for the evening knew their tips would be non-existent, and their morale would be in tatters by the end of the service. On one particularly brutal Tuesday, a young waiter named Kevin had been reduced to a trembling mess because Selina claimed the bubbles in her San Pellegrino were insufficiently vigorous. She made him open 4 separate bottles at the table until one met her unknowable standard, all while maintaining a look of profound, soul-crushing disappointment. Kevin quit the next day. It was into this lion's den that Nina Riley walked. Nina was 24, with a quiet watchfulness in her deep brown eyes and a calm demeanor that was often mistaken for naivete. She wasn't new to the service industry, having worked her way through college waiting tables at less glamorous establishments. She had a knack for reading people and an almost preternatural ability to remain unruffled. She needed the job at Aria. The pay was legendary if you could survive the clientele. Her new manager, Mr. Coleman, a man with a perpetually furrowed brow and a stomach full of ulcers, had given her the tour with a weary solemnity. "The rules are simple, Riley," he'd said, his voice low. "Anticipate, accommodate, and above all be invisible. Your goal is for the guests to have an experience so seamless they forget you exist." He paused, his eyes darting towards the guillotine. "And if you are ever assigned to table 12, God help you." Nina learned about Selina Northwood through the hushed, fearful gossip of the staff. Leo, a veteran waiter with a cynical wit, filled her in during a lull. "She's not a customer, she's a predator," he said, polishing a wine glass with furious precision. She comes here to feel powerful by making us feel small. She apparently comes from old money. Went to Vassar Summers in the Hamptons, knows everyone who matters. She's untouchable. Nina just listened, absorbing the information without comment. She'd met difficult customers before. She'd dealt with entitled students, angry drunks, and condescending academics. How much worse could one woman be? She found out 2 weeks into the job. It was a Thursday night. The restaurant was humming with the low thrum of quiet power. Mr. Coleman approached her, his face pale. "Riley," he whispered, as if saying it too loud would trigger the apocalypse. "The Northwoods are here. You're up. Table 12. A collective sympathetic wince went through the nearby staff. Leo gave her a look that was part pity, part morbid curiosity. Nina just smoothed her apron, took a deep breath, and picked up 2 leather-bound menus. "Okay," she said, her voice even. "Table 12. As she approached the booth, she saw them. Preston was on his phone, looking bored. And Selina, she was watching Nina's approach like a hawk watching a field mouse. She was impeccably dressed in a navy blue dress that probably cost more than Nina's car. Her hair was a perfect blonde helmet, and her face was a mask of placid superiority. But it was her eyes, cold, pale blue, and utterly devoid of warmth, that made Nina's stomach tighten. Nina had never seen this woman before in her life. And yet, as Selina turned her head, just so, a flicker of something sharp and dismissive in her expression, a strange, dissonant chord of familiarity struck Nina so faint and deep it was almost imperceptible. She pushed the feeling aside. It was time to perform. "Good evening," Nina said, her voice steady and clear. "Welcome to Aria. May I get you started with something to drink this evening?" Selina didn't answer. She just stared at Nina for a long, uncomfortable moment, her eyes cataloguing every detail. Finally, she spoke her voice, a low, cultured purr that was somehow more intimidating than a shout. "We will have our usual." She didn't specify what the usual was. It was a test, the first of many. Nina didn't flinch. She had done her homework, quizzing Leo relentlessly. "Of course," Nina replied smoothly. "A bottle of the 2012 Chateau Margaux for Mr. Northwood, and sparkling water with a single thin slice of lime. No ice for you, Mrs. Northwood. I'll have that right out." A flicker of surprise, almost annoyance, crossed Selina's face before the mask of indifference slid back into place. Nina turned and walked away, feeling the weight of that cold blue stare on her back the entire time. The first test was passed, but as she prepared the drinks, that nagging sense of familiarity returned. It wasn't the face, not exactly. It was something else. A posture. A turn of phrase. She couldn't place it, but it was there, a ghost of a memory she couldn't quite grasp. The service that followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Selina Northwood operated not with overt aggression, but with 1,000 tiny cuts. Each interaction was designed to unnerve, to create a mistake where none existed. When Nina presented the wine to Preston, who barely looked up from his phone, Selina interrupted. "Let me see that," she commanded, extending a slender, bejeweled hand. Nina handed her the bottle. Selina examined the label as if searching for a forgery. 2012. An adequate year, I suppose. She waved a dismissive hand. "Proceed." As Nina poured a small tasting for Preston, Selina watched her hands. Her eyes narrowed. "Are you sure you know how to do that?" "You seem hesitant. Don't spill. Preston's suit is Zegna." "I'm quite steady, Mrs. Northwood," Nina replied calmly, pouring a perfect measure without a single tremor. Preston swirled the glass, sniffed, and took a sip, giving a curt nod of approval. Nina filled his glass and then turned to take their order. "I trust you know the specials," Selina said, not looking at the menu. "Recite them, and don't stumble." Nina listed the evening's specials flawlessly, detailing the ingredients and preparation of each dish from memory, her tone professional and even. When she finished, there was a beat of silence. "Fine," Selina said, finally opening her menu. "The Dover sole deboned tableside, and if you make a mess of it, I'll be sending it back, along with the bill for my dry cleaning." She snapped the menu shut. "Preston will have the filet medium rare, more rare than medium. If I see a hint of grey, the chef will be hearing from me directly." "Of course," Nina said, jotting down the order. "An excellent choice." She retreated to the kitchen, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly the farther she got from the table. The chef, a burly Frenchman named Antoine, saw her ticket come in for table 12 and gave her a sympathetic glance. "The dragon lady," he grunted. "Be strong, ma chérie." "I'm trying," Nina said, with a small smile. Throughout the meal, the tests continued. The bread basket was placed a millimeter too far to the left. The water glasses were not refilled with the silent, psychic speed she demanded. The butter was, she claimed, a degree too cold. For each perceived slight, she wouldn't raise her voice. She would simply stop talking, fix Nina with that icy stare, and wait, letting the awkward silence hang in the air until Nina identified and corrected the problem. It was during the main course that the strange feeling of familiarity struck Nina again, this time with more force. She was expertly deboning the Dover sole on a gueridon beside the table. It was a delicate, high-pressure task. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath when a fish was deboned for Selina Northwood. As Nina worked, Selina was speaking to Preston, complaining about a charity gala she had attended. Honestly, the whole affair was utterly provincial, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. You could tell half the women there rented their gowns. And Beatrice Langley had the audacity to wear the same Cartier necklace she wore last spring. So terribly common. It was her pronunciation of the word common. She clipped the end of it, a slight, almost imperceptible twang that seemed entirely out of place with her polished transatlantic accent. It was the kind of accent one gets from years of elocution lessons designed to scrub away any trace of a regional dialect. But for a split second, a crack had appeared in the facade, and a different sound had slipped through. A sound that was rougher, sharper, southern. Nina's hands faltered for a fraction of a second, the deboning knife scraping against the plate. Selina's head snapped towards her. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice dangerously soft. "No, Mrs. Northwood. Not at all," Nina said, recovering instantly. She finished her work, plated the fish beautifully, and set it before her. "Your Dover sole." Selina inspected it, her fork prodding the delicate white flesh. Finding no fault, she gave a curt, dissatisfied nod and took a bite. As Nina cleared the plates later, Preston, who had been silent for most of the meal, finally spoke to her. "The steak was perfect, thank you." He offered a brief, tired smile. "You're very welcome, Mr. Northwood," Nina replied. Selina shot her husband a look that could freeze fire. "Don't encourage them, Preston. It only leads to familiarity." The rest of the meal passed in a similar state of cold tension. They declined dessert. As Nina presented the check, Selina scrutinized every line item. Then she produced her Black American Express card. When Nina returned with the slip to be signed, she watched as Selina deliberately, slowly drew a thick line through the tip amount and wrote a firm, undeniable $0. It wasn't a surprise. No one ever got a tip from Selina Northwood. Her payment was that you were for now still employed. As they rose to leave, Selina paused and looked directly at Nina one last time. "You are new here." It wasn't a question. "You lasted longer than the last one. Don't let it go to your head." Without another word, she swept out of the restaurant, Preston trailing in her wake like a ship's dinghy. Nina stood by the empty table, her mind reeling. It wasn't the insults or the lack of a tip that bothered her. It was that accent, that single misplaced syllable. And something else, too. A memory was stirring deep in the recesses of her mind, a memory of a hot summer day, the smell of sizzling bacon, and a loud, brash voice complaining about customers. A voice that sounded eerily like Selina Northwood's, but stripped of all its expensive polish. She shook her head, trying to clear it. It was impossible. Selina Northwood was old money, a society queen. The woman in her fragmented memory was someone else, entirely. But the seed of curiosity had been planted, and Nina Riley was not the type of person to let a mystery go unsolved. The days following her first encounter with Selina Northwood were filled with a gnawing obsession for Nina. During her shifts, she was the model employee, efficient, polite, and unobtrusive. But internally, her mind was a whirlwind, constantly replaying the evening, searching for clues. The way Selina held her fork, the dismissive flick of her wrist, that single, oddly pronounced word, common. She started by asking Leo more questions, phrasing them casually, so as not to arouse suspicion. "So what's the deal with the Northwoods?" she asked one afternoon while they were folding napkins. "Leo, you said she's old money. That's the legend," Leo said, snapping a napkin into a perfect bishop's mitre. The story goes her family, the Beaumonts, were one of the founding families of the city. Railroads, shipping the whole 9 yards. She was a society debutante, went to the best schools, married Preston, right out of Vassar. It was the merger of the century, his new money, and her ancient name. They say her family estate is a registered historical landmark. Nina frowned. "The Beaumonts, I've never heard of them." "They're not flashy." Leo shrugged. "Old money doesn't need to be. They keep to themselves. That's why she's so high and mighty. She thinks people like us are a different species." This polished history didn't align with the crack Nina had perceived. An old money heiress wouldn't have a trace of a southern twang to suppress. It made no sense, so Nina took her investigation online. Her first searches were fruitless. Selina Northwood yielded hundreds of glossy photos from charity balls and society pages. There she was, smiling serenely next to politicians, artists, and fellow billionaires. Her biography in these articles was always the same, vague, impressive summary daughter of the reclusive Beaumont family, Vassar graduate philanthropist and tastemaker. There were no candid shots, no personal histories, nothing before her grand entrance into society as Preston Northwood's fiancée 20 years ago. It was as if she had sprung into existence, fully formed, draped in designer clothes, and dripping with disdain. Searching for Selina Beaumont was even more of a dead end. The Beaumonts were indeed reclusive, so reclusive that they seemed to have no digital footprint whatsoever. No family photos, no business listings, nothing. It was suspiciously clean, as if scrubbed. Nina started paying closer attention whenever the Northwoods came in. She began volunteering to take table 12, much to Mr. Coleman's bewildered relief. Each time she subjected herself to Selina's quiet torture, but she wasn't just enduring it anymore. She was studying. She noticed things. Selina had a small silvery scar on her left wrist, just above her diamond tennis bracelet, a type of scar that looked like an old burn, perhaps from a hot pan or a stove. It was a working person's scar, not a socialite's. She also had a habit of tapping her lacquered fingernails on the table in a quick, impatient rhythm, tap, tap, tappity tap. A nervous, restless energy that seemed at odds with her carefully composed, serene exterior. One evening, Selina was complaining about the summer heat. "This city is just unbearable in August," she sighed to her lunch companion, a woman named Beatrice Langley, who watched Selina with a mixture of admiration and rivalry. "Preston and I are escaping to the vineyard, thank God. I can't stand being sticky. It's just so undignified." And then she said something that made the hairs on Nina's arms stand up. "It reminds me of those awful humid summers back home. Makes your clothes stick to you like flypaper." Beatrice laughed politely. "I never imagined you suffering through humidity, Selina. I always pictured you growing up with central air and servants to fan you." Selina's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Even the finest old homes can have their rustic charms," she said coolly, changing the subject. "Back home." That was the key. Her official biography placed her upbringing in a stone mansion on the city's Gold Coast. But the way she spoke of the heat, the humidity, the sticky clothes, it sounded visceral, it sounded real, and it sounded distinctly Southern. Nina's own family had roots in the South. Her mother was from North Carolina, and her aunt still lived in Georgia. Nina had spent many childhood summers there, and the memory of that oppressive, sweltering humidity was deeply ingrained. That night, Nina couldn't sleep. She sat at her small kitchen table, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating her determined face. The official story was a lie. She was sure of it. Selina Northwood was hiding something. The question was what she abandoned the polished society searches and tried a different approach. She began searching for phrases for connections. She tried Selina Beaumont plus Georgia, Selina plus Vassar plus Southern. Nothing. It was like searching for a ghost. Frustrated, she leaned back in her chair, her mind drifting. She thought about the voice, the twang on the word common. She thought about the scar. She thought about the impatient tapping of the fingernails. And then a memory surfaced unbidden. She was 10 years old, visiting her Aunt Carol in a small town just outside of Atlanta. They'd gone out for breakfast at a bustling, noisy diner. It was a Waffle House. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and grease. The waitresses were fast, loud, and efficient, shouting orders to the cooks, their pens stuck behind their ears. There was one waitress in particular her 10-year-old self had been fascinated by. She was young, maybe early 20s, with sharp features and bleached blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She was a whirlwind of motion, balancing plates up her arm, her voice cutting through the din. She had a sarcastic, biting wit and complained loudly to the other waitresses about her no-account boyfriend and the cheapskates who didn't tip. And she had a nickname everyone shouted at her. "Senna table 3 needs a waffle stat. Hey Senna, more coffee over here, Senna." Nina's breath caught in her chest. She sat bolt upright, her heart hammering. It was a long shot, a wild, impossible leap of logic. But the memory was so vivid. The impatient way Senna would tap her pen against her notepad while waiting for an order. Tap, tap, tappity tap. The angry red burn mark on her wrist from bumping into the grill. The sharp, southern-inflected voice. Could it be? Could the impeccably polished, terrifyingly regal Selina Northwood heiress to the Beaumont fortune actually be Senna, the Waffle House, waitress from Georgia? It seemed insane. Preposterous. A fantasy born of sleep deprivation and a dislike for a rude customer. But Nina couldn't shake it. She opened her laptop again, her fingers flying across the keyboard. This time her search was different. She wasn't looking for a Beaumont. She was looking for a Senna. She typed in, Waffle House, Senna, Georgia, 1990s. The search results were a jumble of nonsense, too broad, She needed to narrow it down. She tried to remember the name of the town she'd visited with her aunt. It was on the tip of her tongue. Something with a tree in it. Oak. Oakhaven. She typed, Sana Waitress, Oakhaven, Georgia. And there on the third page of the search results was a link to the digitized archives of a small local newspaper, the Oakhaven Gazette. The headline, dated July 1998, read, Local Waitress wins regional pie baking contest. Her heart pounding, Nina clicked the link. The page took a moment to load the old grainy photograph, slowly rendering on her screen. And then she saw it. It was a picture of 3 women holding up pies. The woman in the center was smiling broadly, holding a trophy. She was younger, her face a little fuller, her hair a brassy blonde, but there was no mistaking it. It was her, the sharp cheekbones, the determined set of her jaw, and the eyes. The same cold, calculating pale blue eyes that now stared down the elite of the city from table 12 at Aria. The caption beneath the photo read, Local favorite Selina Sana. Kowalski takes first prize for her famous peach cobbler at the annual county fair. Congratulations, Sana, Selina Kowalski, not Beaumont. Nina leaned back, a slow smile spreading across her face. The Empress had no clothes, and Nina had just found the receipts from the tailor. The discovery of Sana Kowalski from Oakhaven, Georgia, changed everything. Nina now walked into Aria, not with trepidation, but with a quiet, humming confidence. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound, almost comical understanding. Every icy glare, every condescending remark from Selina was no longer the barb of a superior being. It was the desperate defense of a woman terrified of being found out. The Empress wasn't an empress at all. She was just Sana from the Waffle House, playing a role, and her performance was starting to fray at the edges. Perhaps sensing a shift in the power dynamic, the subtle way Nina no longer flinched at her stare, the calm, knowing placidity in her eyes. Selina escalated her campaign. Her microaggressions became more pronounced, her complaints more frequent and absurd. This water, she announced one evening, pushing her glass away. It tastes sweet. Are you using filtered tap water? I demand, bottled. It is bottled, Mrs. Northwood, Nina replied evenly. Fiji, as always. Then the glass is contaminated. Bring me another. Another night, she claimed her soup was cold despite the steam visibly rising from the bowl. She sent it back twice. Antoine the chef was furious, but Mr. Coleman placated him, his face a mask of strained diplomacy. Selina was trying to get Nina fired, and she was becoming less subtle about it. Preston Northwood, for his part, was beginning to look less oblivious and more concerned. He started watching the interactions between his wife and the waitress. He saw Selina's mounting agitation, her increasingly erratic complaints. He noticed the steady, unnerving calm with which Nina met every challenge. One evening, after Selina accused Nina of shortchanging them by $10 on a bill over $1,000, a quick recount proved her wrong. Preston lingered behind as his wife swept out. I apologize for my wife, he said to Nina, in a low voice, his eyes full of a deep, ancient weariness. She has been under a great deal of stress lately. It's no problem at all, Mr. Northwood, Nina said, her expression unreadable. The apology seemed to infuriate Selina even more. Her next visit was with her social rival, Beatrice Langley. It was clear from the outset that Selina was performing for Beatrice, demonstrating her power within the walls of Aria. She was more demanding than ever. The lighting at this table is simply ghastly, Selina declared loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. It's casting the most unflattering shadows. You, she said, snapping her fingers at Nina, have the manager do something about it. Mr. Coleman rushed over, wringing his hands. Mrs. Northwood, I am so sorry. The lighting is centrally controlled. Then uncontrol it, she snapped. I will not dine in a grotto. While Mr. Coleman scrambled to find a solution, Nina continued to serve them, her movements fluid and calm. Beatrice was watching the entire exchange with a small, amused smirk which only fueled Selina's ire. This was when the memory that would become Nina's ultimate weapon fully crystallized. The pie-baking photo had confirmed Sena's identity, but Nina's subconscious was still dredging up details from that long-ago breakfast at the Waffle House. She remembered a sudden tremendous crash, a collective gasp followed by shocked silence, and then an eruption of laughter. Sena the waitress had been trying to impress her manager, or perhaps just show off. She had loaded up a tray with an impossible number of plates, at least a dozen, piled high with pancakes, hash browns, and eggs. She'd tried to hoist it onto her shoulder with a cocky grin, but her foot had slipped on a pat of melted butter on the linoleum floor. The result was a catastrophe of breakfast foods. The tray had gone flying, plates shattered, pancakes sailed through the air like greasy frisbees. A mountain of hash browns and scrambled eggs had landed directly in the lap of a portly, important-looking man in a suit. The man, red-faced and sputtering, had leapt to his feet. Nina now remembered someone shouting his name, Councilman Miller. Sena, covered in syrup and shame, her face bright crimson, hadn't apologized. She had stood amidst the wreckage, put her hands on her hips, and yelled a phrase so raw and unladylike that it had become the stuff of local legend, a phrase that Nina's aunt had repeated with a chuckle for years afterward. Well, damn and blast, Sena had shouted, her Georgia drawl thick as molasses. Guess you all wanted a floor sample. The memory was so clear, so perfect. It was the ultimate piece of ridicule. It wasn't just that Selina Northwood had been a Waffle House waitress named Sena Kowalski. It was that she had been a clumsy, hot-tempered, and infamous one. This knowledge settled inside Nina a heavy, powerful secret. She had no intention of using it. To do so would be cruel, a weapon of mass social destruction. She would keep it to herself, a private source of amusement and armor against Selina's attacks. She believed that simply knowing the truth was enough. She was wrong. Selina, feeling her power over Nina wane and her husband's patience thinning, decided she needed to end things. She needed to have this calm, infuriating waitress removed from her sight permanently, and she planned to do it in the most public and humiliating way possible. The stage was set for their final confrontation a week later. The Northwoods were hosting a small exclusive dinner for a potential business partner of Preston's, a Japanese investor named Mr. Tanaka and his wife. It was a crucial meeting. The deal was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Selina had personally called Mr. Coleman to ensure that every detail would be flawless. And she had made one specific, chilling request. I want the new girl Nina serving my table. She had said, her voice like velvet-wrapped steel. I want to see if she has what it takes. Mr. Coleman had warned Nina. She's setting a trap, Riley. Be careful. One wrong move tonight, and she'll have you fired before the appetizers are cleared. Nina simply nodded. I understand. She knew it wasn't a test. It was an execution, and Selina Northwood had just handed her the axe. Before the night of the pivotal dinner, Nina felt a need to solidify her position, not for herself, but for the sake of certainty. A grainy newspaper photo and a childhood memory were powerful, but they were still in a way ephemeral. She needed something more concrete, a final link in the chain that connected Sena Kowalski to Selina Northwood. She called the one person who could provide it, her Aunt Carol. Aunt Carol, it's Nina. Nina Bug. What a surprise, how are you? Honey, Carol's voice was warm and imbued with the gentle lilt of her Georgia home. I'm good. I'm good. Listen, I have the strangest question for you. Nina began pacing her small apartment. Do you remember years and years ago when I was a kid, you took me to a Waffle House in Oak Haven? Carol laughed. Heavens, child, I've probably taken you to a dozen Waffle Houses. Which time are you talking about? This one was memorable, Nina said. There was a waitress. Everyone called her Sena. Bleached blonde hair, real spitfire. There was an incident with a lot of breakfast plates and a local politician. Aunt Carol let out a hoot of laughter, so loud Nina had to pull the phone from her ear. Oh my lord, you remember that Sena Kowalski? Of course I remember Sena. That girl was a legend in Oak Haven for about 6 months. The hash brown fling, they called it. Poor Councilman Miller smelled like fried potatoes for a week. Sena was so embarrassed she barely showed her face for days. Nina's grip on the phone tightened. What happened to her Aunt Carol? Do you know? Well, that's the thing, Carol said, her voice lowering conspiratorially. She was always talking about getting out, about being somebody. Said Oak Haven was too small for her ambitions. She was saving every penny she made. Then about a year or so after the hash brown fling, she just disappeared, vanished overnight, packed her bags and left. No one ever heard from her again. Carol paused, then continued. Some people said she went out to California to be an actress. Others said she ran off with a rich fella who was just passing through town. Her mum was heartbroken. Sena never even called. What was her ambition? Nina asked quietly. What did she want to be? Rich, Carol said without a moment's hesitation. She didn't care how. She just wanted to be stinking filthy rich. She used to read all those fancy magazines, Town and Country and the like. She'd practiced talking like the people in the movies, trying to lose her accent. We all thought it was a hoot. Sena's going to be a grand lady one day, we'd joke. The final piece clicked into place. The years of elocution lessons to erase the drawl. The fabricated history of a blue-blooded Beaumont. The desperate obsessive need to control her environment and look down on service staff, the very people she used to be. It was all a defense mechanism, a fortress built to protect her fragile new identity from the ghost of Sena Kowalski. Nina, bug, why on earth are you asking about Sena Kowalski after all these years? Aunt Carol asked her, curiosity piqued. Nina took a deep breath. I think I just met her Aunt Carol. She didn't elaborate, and thankfully her aunt didn't press. After hanging up, Nina felt a strange mix of emotions. There was pity for the young, ambitious girl so ashamed of her roots that she would erase her entire life. But there was also a cold resolve. Selina had used her new identity not just to rise, but to crush others. She had become a bully of the highest order, using her manufactured status to inflict the very same shame and humiliation she must have feared herself. Nina now understood that Selina's cruelty wasn't born of strength, but of profound bone-deep weakness. Her fear of being exposed as Sena Kowalski was the engine of her malice. With this confirmation, Nina no longer saw the upcoming dinner as a trap. She saw it for what it was, a stage. Selina had built the set, sent out the invitations, and cast the players. She intended for Nina to be the tragedy, but Nina had just rewritten the script. She would not be the victim in this play. She walked into Aria that evening, feeling a strange sense of calm. She carefully polished the silverware for table 12, arranged the flowers just so, and decanted the vintage Bordeaux that Preston had ordered ahead of time. Every action was precise, deliberate. Mr. Coleman pulled her aside just before the guests arrived. Riley, listen to me. He pleaded, his face slick with sweat. "Don't give her any ammunition. Be perfect. Be invisible. Just get through tonight." "Don't worry, Mr. Coleman," Nina said, giving him a small, reassuring smile. "Everything is under control." As she watched the Northwoods arrive with their esteemed guests, Nina felt the last vestiges of fear evaporate. She saw Selina, resplendent in a silk gown, her diamonds glittering, greeting Mr. and Mrs. Tanaka with a flawless, practiced grace. She looked every bit the part of the city's grand dame. But Nina didn't see Selina Northwood. She saw Sena Kowalski from Oak Haven, Georgia, and she could almost smell the faint scent of hash browns and fear. The dinner began with a tense, theatrical perfection. Selina was in her element, playing the role of the consummate hostess. She guided the conversation with effortless charm, speaking knowledgeably about Japanese art to Mrs. Tanaka and discussing global markets with Mr. Tanaka, all while subtly directing the flow of the service with a flick of her eyes or a slight inclination of her head. Nina moved around the table like a phantom, her service impeccable. She filled wine glasses before they were empty, cleared plates with silent efficiency, and anticipated every need. She was so flawless that her perfection itself seemed to be an act of defiance, which only served to irritate Selina further. The trap wasn't being sprung because the prey refused to make a mistake. Selina waited her patience, wearing thin. She needed a flaw, a crack in Nina's composure that she could exploit. Her moment, she decided, would come with the coffee service after the main course. It was a simple part of the meal which made any mistake all the more glaring. The main courses were cleared. The deal between Preston and Mr. Tanaka seemed to be going well. The atmosphere was convivial. It was the perfect moment for Selina to strike. "Waitress!" She called out, her voice sharp, cutting through the low hum of conversation. The table fell silent. Mr. and Mrs. Tanaka looked up, startled. Preston shot his wife a warning look. "Yes, Mrs. Northwood," Nina replied, stopping by her side. Selina gestured to her husband's empty wine glass. "My husband's glass has been empty for nearly 5 minutes. We are trying to conduct a business dinner here, and your inattentiveness is a distraction. Is this the level of service Aria now provides?" It was a blatant lie. Nina had just topped off Preston's glass moments before. He had taken a large sip, but it was far from empty. It was a manufactured error, a flimsy pretense. "My sincerest apologies, Mrs. Northwood," Nina said, her voice betraying no emotion. "I will be more vigilant." "Vigilance is the bare minimum," Selina retorted, her voice rising. She could feel victory was near. She was going to break this impertinent girl in front of everyone. "Perhaps this position is too demanding for you. Some people are simply not suited for high-end service." She looked around the table, a smug, contemptuous look on her face. "You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, after all." The insult hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Mr. Coleman, who had been hovering nearby, began to move forward, his face ashen. Preston opened his mouth to intervene, a rare flash of anger in his eyes. But Nina held up a hand, a small, subtle gesture to halt them. She looked directly at Selina, and for the first time she did not look away. She held that icy blue gaze, and she smiled. It was not a broad smile, but a tiny knowing and utterly devastating one. She leaned in slightly as if sharing a secret, but she spoke clearly enough for the entire table to hear. Her voice was soft, conversational, and stripped of all deference. "You're right," Nina said. "You can't, but you can certainly try, can't you, Sena?" The name landed with the force of a physical blow. The color drained from Selina's face. Her carefully constructed mask of aristocratic boredom shattered, replaced by raw, naked panic. Her eyes widened, her mouth falling slightly open. Preston stared, confused. "Sena." Nina's gaze didn't leave Selina's. I'm sorry," she continued, her voice still gentle. "I feel I should know how to serve you better. I just keep picturing you in your old uniform. It must be so much harder to balance things in heels than it was in those comfortable sneakers you used to wear." Selina was speechless, frozen. She looked like a cornered animal. Beatrice Langley, who was at a nearby table and had been watching the drama unfold with keen interest, leaned forward, her ears practically twitching. Nina delivered the final fatal blow. "Especially after that awful spill you took," she said, a hint of mock sympathy in her tone. "All those plates. It was a terrible mess. Poor Councilman Miller. All those hash browns." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I have to say, your line back then was a classic." "How did it go again?" "Oh, yes." Nina's voice took on a faint, almost perfect mimicry of a Georgia drawl. "Well, damn and blast, guess you all wanted a floor sample." The silence that followed was absolute and profound. It was broken by a single sharp sound, a choked gasp from Beatrice Langley, who quickly covered her mouth to stifle a bark of laughter. Mr. and Mrs. Tanaka exchanged bewildered glances, understanding only that a colossal social drama was imploding before their eyes. Preston Northwood stared at his wife, a dawning horror and understanding on his face. He wasn't looking at the elegant socialite he had married. He was seeing the cheap dye job, the Waffle House uniform, the years of lies. He was seeing Sena Kowalski. But the most devastating reaction came from Selina herself. The terror in her eyes curdled into pure, unadulterated rage, but it was the rage of the powerless. She was exposed. The secret she had spent 20 years and millions of dollars burying had just been unearthed with a handful of words by a waitress she had tried to destroy. She pushed back from the table, her chair scraping loudly on the floor. Her movements were jerky, clumsy. All her practiced grace had vanished. She opened her mouth to scream, to deny, to say something, but only a strangled squeak came out. Without another word, she turned and fled. She didn't sweep out. She ran. A clumsy, stumbling, panicked flight past the stunned patrons and gaping staff, her silk gown trailing behind her like a deflated banner. The Empress had been dethroned. The guillotine was empty. And in the stunned silence of Aria, Nina Riley stood perfectly still, holding an empty coffee pot, her expression calm, her work finally done. The silence Selina left in her wake was more profound than any sound. It was a vacuum pulling all the air and noise from the opulent dining room of Aria. Patrons who had been pretending not to watch were now staring openly, forks frozen halfway to their mouths. Mr. and Mrs. Tanaka looked at Preston with expressions of deep, sympathetic embarrassment. Their 9-figure business deal, suddenly the least important thing in the room. The staff stood like statues, their professional composure shattered by the sheer, raw humanity of the scene they had just witnessed. Nina remained at the table, the silver coffee pot still in her hand. The adrenaline that had surged through her during the confrontation began to recede, leaving a strange, hollow calm. She had done it. She had pulled the pin on a grenade she didn't even know she was holding until the last second. Looking at Preston Northwood's face, a mask of dawning horror and betrayal, she felt not a victor's triumph, but a somber sense of finality. This was not just the end of an evening. It was the end of a life, an identity meticulously crafted over 2 decades now, lying in ruins on the expensive carpet. Preston was the first to move. He slowly folded his napkin, placing it beside his plate with a precision that seemed utterly surreal. He rose his tall frame, looking stooped and weary. "Mr. Tanaka, Mrs. Tanaka," he said, his voice raspy. "I believe this concludes our evening. My deepest apologies." He gave Nina a long, unreadable look. It wasn't angry, it wasn't grateful, it was simply, bereft. Then he turned and walked out of the restaurant, not running like his wife, but moving with the heavy, defeated gait of a man who had just discovered the foundations of his world were made of sand. The spell was broken. A low murmur erupted across the room, the sound of gossip being born in real time. Beatrice Langley was already tapping furiously into her phone, her face alight with the malicious glee of a social predator who had just witnessed the fall of the Alpha. The story of Selina's downfall was already leaving the building before her car had even left the curb. Within a day, the whispers became a roar. Beatrice's carefully curated text messages had spread the choicest details through the city's elite. The story was told and retold at tennis clubs over boardroom lunches and in the hushed salons of the wealthy. It was a spectacular, irresistible scandal. The city's most feared woman, the empress of ice and old money, was a fake. The Beaumont heiress was Sena Kowalski from Oakhaven, Georgia. Cruel, mocking nicknames bloomed overnight. The hash brown heiress. Waffle House Sena. The fear she had so meticulously cultivated was gone, replaced by the one thing her fragile ego could not withstand: public ridicule. Her social execution was absolute. Invitations to galas were rescinded. Her name was quietly removed from the boards of charities she lorded over. Friends who had once fawned over her now crossed the street to avoid her. She had built her entire world on a pedestal of perceived superiority, and overnight, Nina had kicked it out from under her. The final private confrontation happened in the cold, marble-floored foyer of the Northwoods mansion. The house felt less like a home and more like a museum, to a life that no longer existed. Selina, her face pale and swollen from crying, tried to defend herself. She spun a tale of ambition, of wanting a better life, of doing what was necessary. She blamed Nina, calling her a jealous, vindictive nobody who had sought to destroy her. Preston listened to it all, his expression unchanging. When she was finished, her angry, self-pitying words echoing in the vast space, he finally spoke. His voice was quiet, devoid of the fury she had expected. It was worse. It was empty. "I don't care that you were a waitress." "Sena," he said, the use of her old name, a deliberate final severance. "My father was a mechanic. I started my first company with a loan and a garage. Do you think I care where you came from?" He shook his head, a look of profound sorrow in his eyes. "What I care about is the lie. For 20 years our life has been a performance. I see it now. I see everything." He took a step closer, his voice dropping lower. "That young waiter you had fired because you claimed his cologne was offensive. Did he just remind you of some boy you once knew in Oakhaven, that charity for underprivileged students you refused to fund? Were you afraid of seeing yourself in their faces? All that cruelty, all that venom. It was never about them, was it? It was about you. You were so terrified of someone discovering Sena Kowalski that you spent every day trying to kill her over and over by hurting people who reminded you of her." He looked around at the opulent, loveless house they had built together. "I can't live in this mausoleum anymore. I can't live with the woman you became to protect a secret I would never have judged you for." The divorce was swift and private. Preston was more than fair with the settlement, but the one thing she couldn't have was his name or his protection. Selina Northwood ceased to exist. Sena Kowalski, now wealthy but utterly alone, vanished from the city, retreating into the very reclusiveness she had once faked for her imaginary family. Back at Aria, the change was palpable. It was like a perpetual grey sky had finally cleared. The tension that used to grip the staff from the moment they walked in was gone. Laughter could be heard from the kitchen. Mr. Coleman was seen smiling an expression so rare His facial muscles seemed to struggle with the effort. The staff no longer walked on eggshells, and the service paradoxically became even better, warmer, more genuine. Nina became a reluctant icon. The staff treated her with a new level of reverence, their eyes holding a mix of awe and gratitude. One evening, Leo cornered her as they were setting up for the dinner rush. "I have to say, Nina, I've seen a lot in my 10 years here," he said, shaking his head slowly. "I've seen chefs throw plates, customers throw tantrums, and marriages fall apart over a bottle of wine. But I've never seen anything like that. You didn't just get a rude customer to leave. You liberated a kingdom." Nina offered a small, tired smile. "It wasn't a kingdom, Leo. It was just a very sad, very scared woman in a gilded cage." The victory, however, felt complicated. She had won, but the battle had left a strange taste in her mouth. She had exposed a lie, yes, but she had also completely dismantled a person's life. Watching Selina flee the restaurant, stripped of all her power and dignity, hadn't felt like justice. It had felt like a tragedy. Nina realized with stunning clarity that she wanted no part of this world, this theater of power, wealth, and profound insecurity. A few months after the incident, she handed her notice to Mr. Coleman. Her savings account was healthy, and her path was clear. She was re-enrolling in college to finish her degree in psychology. She was no longer content to simply observe human behavior. She wanted to understand it. She wanted to know why people build such elaborate fortresses around their hearts, and what it takes to help them find the courage to come out. Her last night at Aria was filled with a warmth that would have been unimaginable just a few months prior. Chef Antoine, a man who had lived in terror of Selina's palate, prepared a special tasting menu for her. "For you," he said, presenting a dish with a flourish. "I cook with a light heart for the first time in years." The staff presented her with a beautiful leather-bound journal. Inside the front cover, in a dozen different scripts, they had all signed it. The main inscription, written in Mr. Coleman's neat hand, read, "To Nina, the quiet giant slayer. Thank you for reminding us that the best service is done with dignity." As she walked out of Aria for the last time, the cool night air felt fresh and clean. She thought of Selina, or rather, Sena Kowalski. She hoped that somewhere stripped of her false identity, she might begin the difficult work of building a real one that didn't require cruelty as a shield. But she knew that wasn't her story to write. Her own was just beginning a path leading not toward wealth or status, but toward understanding. She had walked into Aria looking for a job, but she had walked out with a purpose to understand the intricate, fragile, and often hidden truths that make us who we are. And so, the reign of Selina Northwood came to an end, not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating whisper of a name, Sena. This story is a powerful reminder that the most intimidating facades are often the most fragile, built over a foundation of deep insecurity. People who build their thrones on the fear of others are often the most fearful people of all, terrified that one day someone will see them for who they truly are. Nina didn't have money or status, but she had the truth, and in the end, the truth was the only weapon that mattered. Have you ever met someone like Selina, who used their power to make others feel small? Or have you ever been a Nina, quietly observing, knowing there was more to the story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of truth to overcome tyranny, no matter how small the kingdom, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who would appreciate a story of real-life drama and poetic justice, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more stories about the hidden lives and secret dramas that unfold around us every single day. Thank you for listening.